Finally, Jason proposed marriage, but the person he proposed to wasn't me. From the age of 8 to 28, I had been with him for a whole 20 years. The moment he got down on one knee facing another person, I became a complete laughingstock. Amid the pitying looks of everyone, I hysterically questioned him, only to be accidentally knocked down by a lampstand. After being reborn, I decided to let go of the past, but he came running to me from thousands of miles away. I regret it. Please don't abandon me. Some people are really heartless. Chloe, who was distributing flyers with me, thought I didn't deserve this. In the middle of the bustling shopping mall, it had been decorated into a proposal scene. Among the numerous balloons and a sea of flowers, Jason got down on one knee, his affectionate gaze fixed firmly on Joanna in front of him. Amid the cheers, Joanna was so moved that her eyes filled with tears and she accepted his proposal. In my previous life, when I saw this scene, I was so stimulated that I excitedly went forward to question Jason, making a huge scene. In the middle of the stage, the two of them looked so perfect together. While I was wearing a faded part-time job uniform and hysterically pestering them, I seemed more and more like a clown in their unwavering relationship. The moment the huge lampstand fell on me, I saw Jason subconsciously protect Joanna in his arms. 20 years of companionship and obsession finally crumbled into dust. I was seriously injured by the impact and died before I could be sent to the hospital. At this moment, Chloe tightly grasped my hand and looked at me worriedly. The expression on her face seemed to suggest that as long as I gave the word, she would immediately rush forward with me and smash the scumbag's head. Thinking that in my previous life, everyone was only concerned about running for their lives, and she broke her leg while going against the crowd to pull me. My eyes immediately turned red, and I reached out and gave her a big hug. She was stunned for a moment and then patted my back instead. There are plenty of men out there. Let's not be sad. I smiled and replied, yeah, I'll listen to you. I won't be sad. After experiencing life and death, I really wasn't sad anymore. The love of the poor has always been a test of people's hearts, let alone a young master who used to live in wealth. His friends began to come forward to stop me, and some even took Joanna's side already. Tina, you're not good enough for him. Don't make a fool of yourself. Only Joanna's family can help Jason revive the Jason family now. Since you love him so much, how can you bear to see him live such a hard life? Jason doesn't love you at all. He just feels responsible for you. Don't always force him with your own wishful thinking. Yes, it had always been just my own wishful thinking. Chloe was so angry that she wanted to argue with them, but I stopped her. Looking at Jason who was walking over, I nodded gently. I wish you happiness. A look of surprise flashed across his face, and there was some confusion in his eyes. After saying that, I simply and neatly pulled Chloe away, leaving a group of people in shock. What's going on? Isn't she playing hard to get? How could she let Jason go so easily? There must be more drama to come. I ignored the gossip behind me. After returning the work badge and flyers to the merchant, I left the shopping mall. The Jason family was my sponsor. I was a child from a poor mountainous area. My parents died early, and I depended on my elderly grandfather. During a poverty assistance activity held by a TV station, the young Jason chose me. When I was 8 years old and my grandfather passed away, the Jason family took me home and adopted me. That was my first time entering the city. I stood nervously in the small garden of the Jason family's villa. There was a big hole in my sneakers, and my big toe couldn't wait to stick out. Feeling inferior, I lowered my head and didn't dare to look up at people, but Jason's mother gently gave me a hug. From that day on, I became a member of the Jason family. Jason's father and mother were both wonderful people. They treated me as their own child and loved me even more than their only son. Unfortunately, good people don't live long. When I was 18 years old, the Jason family's investment failed. Jason's father and mother, who were hounded by debt collectors and in a terrible mess, crashed into the bridge railing due to fatigue driving and fell into the river with the car. After their death, Jason was depressed for a long time until the university admission notice arrived. Both of us were admitted to a good local university, but this news only made us happy for a short while. The tuition fees for university could be loaned, but we still had to pay for living expenses ourselves. The creditors of the Jason family had also been pressing us hard all the time. It became extremely unrealistic for both of us to go to university. In his surprised eyes, I tore the admission notice in my hand to pieces. Jason, you go to university. I'll earn money to support you. If it weren't for the Jason family, I wouldn't have been able to leave the mountainous area. I might have dropped out of school and got married much earlier. I don't know what kind of life I would be living now. If one of us was destined to sacrifice between me and Jason, I chose to be that one. During the 4 years of university, Jason studied extremely hard and always ranked first in both professional courses and general courses. He gave me the scholarship as soon as he got it, telling me not to work so hard. At that time, I was working 3 jobs by myself. I made coffee in a coffee shop during the day and worked as a cashier in a convenience store at night. In between, I also went to be a promoter in front of the supermarket. I didn't dare to go to the hospital when I was sick and just endured it under the quilt. But no matter how hard I tried to earn money, I couldn't fill the hole left by the Jason family's debt. Once, I was so tired that I dizzily fell into the green belt and got scratched all over. When I limped back to the rented basement, Jason, who had suddenly returned, tightly hugged me. His tears flowed down my neck, across the bloodshot wounds, causing waves of pain. Tina, I will definitely let you live a good life in the future. The Jason family had been kind to me, and my grandfather said that one should never forget kindness and turn one's back on it. I had never thought of asking him to repay me for everything I had done. But then he kissed me, and the seed that had been hidden in my heart for many years suddenly sprouted. In the year when Jason graduated from university, he entered the Joanna family's group with excellent grades. With his successive promotions in recent years, the burden on my shoulders had also become a bit lighter. I quit my night job and started reviewing lessons at home, wanting to obtain a diploma through self-study. At the same time, it was also to narrow the gap between me and Jason. I had followed Jason to several of his friends' gatherings. They had a great time chatting, but I couldn't get a word in. After coming back, I made up my mind to pick up my studies seriously and keep up with his pace. Chloe was my colleague in the coffee shop and had witnessed me and Jason's journey all the way. She quietly reminded me, Tina, your Jason is good-looking and has remarkable abilities. There are countless young girls eyeing him outside. You're not young anymore. You should find a time to get married as soon as possible, or you'll have nowhere to cry later. After Jason came back from work, I subtly mentioned the matter of marriage, but he indifferently changed the topic. I thought he was too tired from work and under too much pressure, so I didn't ask further. But what happened next was beyond my expectation. There was a heavy rainstorm on the weekend. After finishing my shift at the coffee shop, I quickly went to take an umbrella to Jason, who was working overtime. But unexpectedly, I saw him walking out with a girl. The two of them got into the car chatting and laughing. I don't know when the umbrella in my hand fell to the ground. The heavy rain drenched my head, and I went home in a daze. That night, I waited for a long time. He didn't come back until after midnight. I asked him where he had been, and he wearily pinched the bridge of his nose and said that he had been working overtime until now. You're lying. My voice became extremely sharp. That day, we had a huge quarrel, and finally, he slammed the door and left, never coming back. I called him countless times, but he didn't answer. I went to wait for him downstairs at his company, and only when I met an acquaintance did I know that he had gone on a business trip. He went with the boss's daughter. A month later, he finally came home, but it was to pack his luggage. Under my stubborn obstruction, he sighed. Tina, even if we work for a lifetime, we still won't be able to pay off the debt owed by the Jason family. I'm really tired after all these years. No matter how hard I try, I can't compete with those with backgrounds. The performance that I worked countless nights for was snatched away just like that. I don't want to go on like this anymore. Do you understand me? I felt as if I had been struck by lightning. I looked at Jason in front of me in disbelief. I used to live a good life when I was young. I've suffered enough in these years. I will take back everything of the Jason family sooner or later. Tina, you can't help me. He left resolutely, his back looking determined yet lonely. I hugged the quilt and cried all night. In the first 10 years after coming to the Jason family, we were inseparable. In the later 10 years, we depended on each other. There were many people in his world, but I only had him. I wasn't reconciled and went to find him many times later, trying to win him back, but he always avoided seeing me. Chloe thought I was too depressed, so she dragged me to the newly opened shopping mall to distribute flyers and also to relax. As a result, I witnessed Jason's proposal scene and was accidentally killed by a lamp stand. Maybe I lived a cowardly life and died a cowardly death too. So God gave me a chance to start over. In my previous life, almost my whole world revolved around Jason. This time, I wanted to live for myself. After calmly leaving the shopping mall, I went home. While calling the landlord to tell him that I wanted to check out, I started packing my luggage. I had lived in this prosperous big city for 20 years. I used to think that I would never leave here in my lifetime. But now that there was nothing to hold me back, I should leave too. My luggage was very simple, just a few clothes and shoes. The other things in the house were all bought by me and Jason together, and I didn't want any of them. The moment I opened the door, Jason happened to be holding the key and about to insert it into the lock. I was a bit surprised, and he stared at the suitcase in my hand. "Where are you going?" "Going to stay at Chloe's for a few days." I told the truth, just without telling him that I didn't plan to come back. "Let me take you there. It's not safe for a girl to walk alone at night." Jason seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and reached out extremely naturally to take my luggage, but he missed it. I took a gentle step back to avoid his movement. He immediately froze, and I smiled somewhat sarcastically. "I've walked on the roads at 2 o'clock in the morning for several years. I'm already used to it. It's just getting dark now. It's not late at all." Looking at the person who was blocking the elevator door tightly in front of me, I asked helplessly, "What on earth are you here for?" Jason's eyes gradually became unnatural, and his voice dropped as if he was having a hard time saying something. "Tina, stop making trouble. Could you please not show up in front of Joanna again in the future? She was very unhappy when she learned about our affairs." I was almost angered into laughter and interrupted him directly. "I showed up there today completely by accident. Don't worry. I won't pester you anymore." The corners of Jason's mouth trembled slightly, and he forced a smile. The words on the tip of his tongue were swallowed back, and in the end, only his instructions remained. "I've already bought this house. You can live here in peace from now on. Consider it compensation for all these years. Forget about me in the future." If it had been before, I would surely have refused with great pride. Not only that, but I would also have begged him bitterly not to leave me. But now that I've had a brush with death, I've finally let it go. He was the only family I had in this world. However, without him, I still have to live, and life has to go on. I can survive alone. Alone, I can also start a new life. I looked up at him calmly and agreed indifferently. "Okay, I promise you. Now, could you please step aside?" Jason was taken aback, and his expression was a bit startled. It seemed that he had prepared a lot of words to persuade me, but in the end, none of them came in handy. I quit my job at the coffee shop and stayed at Chloe's place for 2 days. She was very happy that I had cheered up again, and at the same time, she was indignant for me. "You've done so much for Jason. After so many years of feelings, he changed his heart just like that. Men are really no good." I didn't care at all, and there wasn't even a ripple in my heart. Jason's family had saved my life, and I had almost died for Jason once. Let's just consider it even. We won't owe each other anything from now on. I was thinking about where to go next. After thinking about it for a long time, I finally decided to go back to the mountains first and visit my grandpa who was buried there. On the day before I set off, Jason sent me a message. It was an electronic wedding invitation. In the photo, the two people were smiling brightly. The next second, the message was withdrawn. The dialog box showed that the other party was typing. After dawdling for a few minutes, a sentence was sent. Sorry, wrong message. This was obviously not Jason's style. I guessed that Joanna had taken his phone and deliberately showed her ownership to me. I was too lazy to bother with such petty tricks. I neatly closed the dialog box and conveniently put all of his contact information into the blacklist. Jason and Joanna's wedding was held grandly. Joanna's family was wealthy, and the luxury cars for sending the bride blocked the whole street. Many passers-by took a lot of videos, and after they were pushed onto the hot search, there were both praises and criticisms. Some people were envious. Being born into a good family is really a skill. This girl is really lucky. Some people were jealous and said, if you are born with deficiencies, make it up later. Marrying a wealthy wife, you won't have to worry about food and drink for the rest of your life. Some people also dug up old scores. I heard that the groom originally had a childhood sweetheart girlfriend and dumped her to marry into a wealthy family. If this is true, this man is really a scoundrel. I was so dizzy from taking the bus in the mountains that I didn't know I had become the object of sympathy among netizens. Getting off the minibus, I saw continuous green mountains in front of me. I walked out of here alone, and now I'm coming back alone. After half of my life has passed, I'm returning to where I started. After Jason started working, I had mentioned to him that I wanted to go back to the mountains to have a look. He said he was busy and never had the time. I waited, and finally, it just ended up being dropped. The green mountains in front of me had already changed their appearance. A cement road had been paved between the county town and the small town at the foot of the mountain. The minibus reached its terminal here, and there was no vehicle going further up. The village where I was born was on one of the inconspicuous mountain tops. In the past, people in the mountainous areas lived a very difficult life. It was hard to get water and plant crops. There was only one school in the whole mountainous area. And when I was a child, I had to get up before dawn to go to school. Grandpa carried me on his back, climbed over a mountain, and waded across a river before we could reach the small town at the foot of the mountain. At this moment, carrying my suitcase, I walked on the path in my memory. I couldn't help but feel timid. The feeling of being nervous when approaching my hometown welled up in my heart. Help! I heard a cry for help and quickly turned around to look. There were few people around the stone bridge at the entrance of the town. In the middle of the small river under the bridge, a small figure was struggling. Seeing that the struggling movements were getting weaker and weaker, I almost jumped into the river without thinking. The river water in the mountains was bone-chillingly cold. I gritted my teeth and swam hard towards the middle. I put my arm around the child's chest from behind and then turned around and swam back. Finally, the commotion here attracted the residents of the small town. Someone found a long bamboo pole and stretched it over. With the help of everyone, we successfully rescued the person. Isn't this the child of teacher Sean's family? Someone recognized the child's identity, picked up the already blue-faced child on his back, and ran towards the clinic. I breathed a sigh of relief, wrung out my wet clothes, and settled down in a hostel in the town. The next day, before dawn, I climbed up the mountain. When I reached the top of the mountain, the sun peeked out. Leaning against Grandpa's tombstone, the grievances that had been hidden for a long time burst out all at once. My tears, mixed with the morning light, made me burst into sobs in an instant. Grandpa, I miss you. The mountainous areas used to be very poor. Besides hardships, poverty also brought diseases to us. I could hardly remember what my parents' faces looked like in my memory. In the year they passed away, there was a heavy snowfall. The heavy snow blocked the mountain passes. There was a lack of doctors and food in the mountains, and many people died of diseases. The TV station reported this snow disaster, and many people in society generously donated money and supplies. Even targeted assistance was launched. My fate with Jason's family started from here. At that time, I was sallow and thin, shorter than my peers, and was inconspicuous among a group of children. And Jason, who was held by his mother, was wearing a clean and tidy little suit and didn't feel nervous at all under the dazzling flashlights. The assistance ceremony under everyone's gaze was for the recipients like another stab to their self-esteem. I was young and didn't know what self-esteem meant, but the pitying looks from everyone still made me want to run away. But I couldn't run away. After my parents passed away, there was no labor force in the family. Grandpa was old and had bad legs and feet. The family was penniless. My uncles and relatives could hardly support themselves, and they couldn't take care of our grandpa and me. If survival was a problem, what was the use of self-esteem? I not only couldn't run away but also had to find ways to win the donor's favor. Only in this way could I hope to survive with grandpa. Seeing that Jason was alone, I looked up at the delicate little brother in front of me. Choose me. I'll always be with you and never leave you in the future. These days, Chloe would call me from time to time and occasionally she would mention Jason. In the first few days after you left, I always saw his car parked outside the community. Later, maybe he realized something was wrong. He stopped me and asked where you had gone. How could I betray you? Not only did I not tell him, but I also gave him a good scolding. Compared to Chloe's indignation, I actually found it a bit funny. I had already drawn a clear line with Jason, and he also had new family members to accompany him. In the past, he always thought I was making a scene and it was embarrassing. But now that I'm no longer persistent, he seems to be unable to let go instead. The promise I made when I was young, I had kept it in my heart all my life. In my previous life, until I died, I had never thought of leaving him. But now that I've been reborn, I don't owe him anything anymore. On my way down the mountain, I unexpectedly ran into my uncle's family. Under their warm invitation, I promised to visit their home as a guest the next day. With the development of the times, the young people in the mountains gradually went out to work. After their lives got better, they took their family members out. And for those who didn't go out, most of them moved from the mountain to the small town at the foot of the mountain. During the meal, my aunt kept putting food in my bowl. I haven't seen you for so many years. You've grown into such a big girl. Are you still living in the family that adopted you? Are you married? After learning that I was still single, my aunt patted her chest generously. Auntie will help you with this. There are several sons in some families in the village who are all good. I'll introduce you to them another day. My aunt was so enthusiastic that she was quick-tempered and wouldn't take no for an answer. I quickly waved my hand. No, no, but she pressed my words without hesitation. Tina, it's not that Auntie wants to meddle in other people's business. Girls as old as you in the village already have 2 children. If your grandpa were still alive and saw that you were alone and no one was taking care of you, he would be so sad. When it came to grandpa, I felt a pang in my nose. In rural areas, most girls who dropped out of school early like me got married early. At my age, it was really rare to be uneducated and unmarried, so it was no wonder my aunt was worried. Just when I didn't know how to refuse, there was a sudden commotion at the door. Excuse me. Is Tina here? A young man, dressed neatly, with slightly dark skin, a big bright smile showing his white teeth, appeared in front of me. As soon as he came up, he put 2 baskets of eggs in front of me, which left me looking confused. I'm the uncle of the child who fell into the water the day before yesterday. If you hadn't rescued him in time, my nephew might have been in trouble. I'm here specially to thank you. Sean's tone was sincere. My aunt looked at us in surprise, slapped her thigh excitedly, and said, "Oh, what a coincidence." She then turned sideways and whispered to me. Teacher Sean is from the city. He has a good character and looks good. I heard that he graduated from a famous university. Many families in the village wanted to make connections with him, but he refused them all. You have this fate with him. You must seize this opportunity. Looking at my gossipy aunt, I was so embarrassed that I quickly said goodbye. Sean followed me out. I was a bit puzzled about how he had found me. He smiled and explained, "It's simple. Most people in the small town are acquaintances. New faces usually stay in the hostel." I asked the hostel owner. There was only one girl who checked in the day before yesterday, and it wasn't anyone else but you. It seemed that he hadn't dressed so formally for a long time. His shirt was a bit tight, and he tugged at the collar. You're back to visit your relatives, right? I live in the school in the town. If you need any help, you can come to me. Sean was a man of his word. After learning that I planned to stay in the small town for a short while, he immediately followed me to the hostel. He seemed to be very familiar with the owner. After discussing for a while, the owner gave me the address of a small courtyard and a key. This is my private house. Since you're teacher Sean's friend, I'll rent it to you at a low price. I was overjoyed and thanked him repeatedly. Although Jason had given me a house, my thrifty nature couldn't be changed for a while. Fortunately, it didn't cost much to live in the small town, and my savings were enough for me to live for a period of time. My uncle told me that there was a landslide near my grandfather's cemetery some time ago. Fortunately, there was no one living in that area, so it didn't cause any casualties. But no one could say for sure whether such accidents would continue to happen in the future. I discussed it with my uncle and decided to choose a new cemetery for my grandfather. That's also the reason why I decided to stay here for a short period of time. When Sean learned about this, he was very enthusiastic and busied himself with all kinds of things. His appearance in private was quite unexpected. He wore a white old man's vest, with a plaid shirt over it, and paired it with wide shorts and flip-flops. It was quite different from the traditional image of a teacher, but he was quite efficient when it came to doing things. The small town was already very different from what I remembered in my childhood. When I still had no idea about the location for the new cemetery, Sean had already come to me with a map and circled several places for me to choose from. With the help of my uncle and Sean, this matter was successfully completed. Sean's nephew Leo followed us around all day long and often got himself dirty like a big tabby cat. He was sturdy and his facial features were somewhat similar to Sean's, but his skin was much fairer than Sean's. He ran around the town all day long and got into trouble, which often gave Sean a headache. I was a bit curious and asked, "Where are his parents? Why are you taking care of the child?" "My sister and her husband are busy with work and don't have time to take care of the child. Coincidentally, I'm teaching here, so they left him in my care." It was obvious that Sean was a child who grew up in a big city. He was warm-hearted, straightforward, polite, and had good knowledge. Most importantly, he didn't feel inferior or timid and had an inclusive attitude towards unknown things. I was a bit puzzled about why such a person would teach here. He touched the back of his head and explained with a smile. "My mother was a volunteer teacher. She once taught here and I just wanted to see the place where she worked." Looking at his side face, a similar smiling face in my memory emerged. "Is it Teacher Helen? How is she now?" Sean's eyes lit up instantly and then dimmed again. "She passed away." I knew I had said something wrong and quickly apologized. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." He waved his hand and brushed it off with a smile. Because of Teacher Helen, I became a bit closer to Sean. When I reached school age back then, my grandfather carried me over mountains and across rivers, with each step being difficult, and sent me to school. When I walked into the classroom for the first time, Teacher Helen walked over with a smile and taught me to write my own name. "Tina? What a pretty Tina." She took my hand from my grandfather's, tied my braids neatly again, and gave me a piece of black candy. I held it in my palm for a long time. By the time I got home from school, it had already melted into black soft mud. My grandfather pushed away my hand that I held in front of him, gesturing for me to eat it by myself. I licked my palm carefully. It tasted bitter, but my heart was sweet. At that time, there were many young teachers who came to teach as volunteers in the mountainous area, and many of them left as well. Most of them came and went, leaving before we could even recognize their faces. But she stayed for a long time and didn't leave until I was adopted by the Jason family. After gradually getting to know Sean, he occasionally invited me to help out at school. The children around the small town all studied here, but compared to before, the number of students was much smaller. Sean said, "This is an inevitable result of social progress and is also a good thing. It indirectly shows that fewer and fewer children are separated from their parents." There weren't many teachers in the school, and Sean took on most of the teaching subjects by himself. Sometimes when he was too busy, he would ask me to supervise the students doing their homework. I shook my head nervously and said shyly, I didn't study much. I'm afraid I'll mislead the students. But he smiled and encouraged me, you won't know if you can do it until you try. I heard that you had good grades back then. These things surely won't be difficult for you. I didn't know where his blind confidence in me came from. For a moment, I was at a loss, but I was pushed to do it anyway. Fortunately, I studied hard back then. Although I had dropped the knowledge for many years, it didn't seem so strange when I picked it up at this moment. After getting along well with the children, I stayed in the small town for a longer and longer time. If Chloe hadn't mentioned Jason from time to time on the phone, I would have almost forgotten about him. There seems to be a problem with the Joanna family group. There are reports that their projects were obtained through illegal means, which has brought up a lot of old cases. She hesitated for a moment and then said, Tina, recently Jason has been hanging around downstairs at my place. It seems that he's waiting for you to come back. Thinking about the days when I was with Jason before, I suddenly felt that it seemed like something from a previous life, so far away. While my thoughts were wandering, a little girl in the classroom walked timidly to my side and stuffed a clean peach into my palm. Teacher Tina, here you are. It's so sweet. Her pure smile instantly dispelled the gloom in my heart. Looking at her shy figure running away, I couldn't help smiling. During these days when I picked up textbooks again, I suddenly thought of the diploma that I hadn't obtained in my previous life. At that time, I needed that diploma because I hoped to shorten the distance between Jason and me. But now that my obsession with the diploma has faded, the longing for university has rekindled in my heart. Sometimes Sean would tell me interesting stories about his college days in the north, which were very different from our southern cities. But the same thing was that they were equally vivid, equally bright, and equally made people yearn for them. I remembered the days when I accompanied Jason to college, looking at the brightly lit library and the students walking back to the dormitory in groups. It would be a lie to say that I wasn't envious. But whenever Jason looked at me with an apologetic look, I had to pretend that I didn't care at all. At the beginning, he also tried to teach me the courses he learned at college, but I was busy working to earn money all day long. How could I spare any thought to learn? Later, he thought that I wasn't interested in it, and coupled with his busy coursework, he just let this matter pass. But thinking about it, I used to have excellent academic performance and was admitted to a good university. How could I not long to become a better person and go to a better future? It was just that my longing was suppressed by reality, and I buried everything in my heart, and even managed to deceive myself. The villagers in the small town sent a jar of homemade bayberry wine. Sean didn't know how strong it was and drank a few more sips out of greed. He was so drunk that he hugged the big tree at the entrance of the classroom and talked nonsense. Fortunately, all the students had already gone home after school. Otherwise, if they saw him like this, he would be too embarrassed to face people tomorrow. After I coaxed Leo to wash up and go to sleep, I came to deal with him. Drunk Sean looked so obedient, but his behavior was quite rebellious. Not only did he refuse to go back to sleep obediently, but he also dragged me all the way to the station at the entrance of the town. Pointing at the empty waiting area, he said to me, "When I was a kid, my mother was basically not at home. I missed her so much. My sister said that when I grew up, I could go to find her. The first time I came here to look for my mother, I waited here for a whole day. She didn't come to pick me up until midnight. At that time, I had just started junior high school. I took a long bus ride by myself and came to see her full of expectations, but I was poured cold water on my head. Later, I got angry with her and went to a faraway place to go to college. After graduation, I refused to come back. Occasionally when she called, I hung up impatiently, and for this reason, my father scolded me a lot. I always refused to talk to her properly, so when she got sick, she didn't dare to tell me. When she passed away, I was on a business trip in another place. By the time I rushed back, she had already gone. I didn't even get to see her for the last time." As he was talking, Sean seemed to sober up a little. He sat down on the ground with a plop, hugged his knees and buried his head in them. It's so nice that you still remember her and that there are still people who remember her. The surroundings were silent, and the sound of sobbing gradually rang in my ears. Before I knew it, the moon came out. I gently patted his shoulder. Not only I remember her. All the children she taught will remember her. Many people advised teacher Helen to leave together back then, but she gently and firmly refused. Although families with better conditions have already started to move out of the mountains, there are always those with poor conditions. These children also need to study. Then these children in poor and backward areas have to change their destinies by their own efforts and walk out of the mountains. And the only thing I can do is that as long as there is still one child here who hasn't walked out, I will never leave. At that time, I didn't know how much sacrifice she had made for this. Now that I saw the vulnerable Sean, I realized how great she was. Sean, she might not have been a qualified mother, but she was definitely the greatest mother. When Sean saw me the next day after sobering up, he had a rare look of embarrassment on his face. He walked slowly to my side and said with some difficulty, "Well? I drank too much yesterday. Did I do anything strange?" I teased him a bit mischievously. "Yes." He was shocked and his face changed color. "No way. What did I do?" "Well, you just hugged the big tree at the station and insisted on taking it back." Sean slapped his forehead in frustration and simply covered his face with his hands. I laughed loudly and went to urge the students to go to class. The students, who didn't know what was going on, also laughed at him along with me. Now, he was completely withdrawn. Perhaps it was because we opened up our hearts that night that Sean and I had more topics to talk about. "You want to ask me if my father and the others ever blamed my mother, right?" Of course they did. But my father always told us that what my mother did was a good thing and we should support her. So he brought up my sister and me by himself, allowing my mother to stay in the mountains without any worries. I wasn't surprised at all by what he said. Only a family full of love could raise a person with such an open and bright personality like Sean. Ha! You don't know. In the years when my father took care of me, it was a miracle that I survived. When I was a kid and slept with my father, he snored so loudly that I couldn't fall asleep at all. Finally, when I managed to push him, he turned over and almost crushed me to death. It was a small thing that he boiled the noodles until they were burnt. When he made fried rice with eggs for me, there were eggshells in it. When he rode a bike to pick me up after school, I had just sat properly on the back seat when he kicked me off with a sweeping leg. He didn't realize that he had left me behind until he got home. Later, my grandma couldn't stand it anymore and took my sister and me to live with her for 2 years. Later, when I went to school, I just followed my sister around with snot running down my nose. When I think about those past events, it's all bitterness. I couldn't help being amused by him, but he turned his face away somewhat embarrassedly and scratched his head. Time passed quickly during my stay in the small town. Before I knew it, I had been there for 2 months. Sometimes when I went to my aunt's house for dinner, she would always pull me aside privately and ask me a few questions. "I see that you and Mr. Sean get along quite well. How's it going between you two?" I quickly blushed and distanced myself from it. "Mr. Sean and I are just friends. Auntie, please don't play matchmaker blindly." As time went by, I gradually realized that Sean and Jason were completely different people. Previously, when I was preparing to take the self-taught examination, Jason said that such a diploma wasn't worth having and told me to stay at home with peace of mind and that he would support me. However, the moment Jason saw me pick up my textbooks, it was as if he had seen through the longing in my heart. He said, "It's never too late to start doing what you want to do. People should live according to what they desire." During my days in the town, I hadn't thought about the past for a long time, but Jason always showed up in my life in an inappropriate way. On the day he called, Sean and I were hurrying to Peek's home, that little girl who gave me peaches in class. The resources of the small town school were only enough to support the children to study until junior high school. If they wanted to continue their studies further, they had to go to the urban area. Peek's sister Bamboo was the last batch of students taught by Ms. Helen. Now she was about to enter senior year in high school, but she suddenly dropped out of school and came back. Hearing this, Sean immediately became anxious and put down what he was doing and rushed out. When I was busy settling the students, a strange number kept ringing. I hung up without even looking at it. By the time I hurriedly arrived at Peek's home, Sean and her parents were in a stalemate. The child's grades are not good. She's not cut out for studying. The girl in the corner of the room was wiping her tears with her back to people, and Sean's tone couldn't help but become a bit urgent. The schools in the urban area are different from those in the town. It's normal for grades to fluctuate under great pressure. Just give her some more time and things will definitely improve. What's the point of a girl studying so much? It's better for her to get married earlier and help the family instead. If you're worried about the money, I'll pay for her tuition and living expenses. There's only 1 year left before the college entrance examination. At least let her have a try. But no matter what he said, Peek's parents were determined and wouldn't budge at all. Suddenly, water started dripping from the cracks of the black roof tiles. It turned out that it had started to rain outside. Bamboo and Peek skillfully took out bowls and basins to catch the water. Several children huddled in the dim and crowded room, and their poverty was laid bare. Sean felt a bit defeated and still wanted to say something, but he had already been shown the door. We hadn't walked a few steps when the girl chased after us. Her eyes were red. "Mr. Sean, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I'm so stupid. No matter how hard I try, my grades just won't improve. I've let you down." Sean comforted her a few words. Seeing that the rain was getting heavier and heavier, he urged her to go back. All the way, Sean didn't say a word. I had never seen him look so downcast. His eyes were a bit unfocused, and his tone was even lower. "I always thought that as long as you work hard, there's nothing you can't do. Am I wrong? I've clearly tried very hard to help her." I shook my head and expressed my view. "You're not wrong. It's just that this matter might be a bit different from what you thought. I was also a child who went from the mountains to the city to study, and I knew how much more effort we needed to make compared to others in order to stand on the same starting line as them. It's difficult for children from poor families to become successful, but for those who are willing to strive for progress, even if they are given a glimmer of hope, they will hold on to it tightly." But what if there's something wrong with the child's own mindset? For children growing up in mountainous areas, the city is like another world. It's bizarre, gorgeous yet cruel. You'll see many things you've never seen before, and you'll also see another kind of life that you dare not even hope for. Old clothes and strange accents can all become reasons for you to be ridiculed. At the age of 15 or 16, self-esteem is growing rapidly. We can't choose our birth, and the only thing we can control is our efforts. However, social resources are tilted towards the city. Some people are born in Rome, while others are born to be beasts of burden. Even talent is scarce and unevenly distributed. There are some distances that you can't make up for no matter how hard you try. When you hope more and more to change your fate through one thing, you'll be more and more afraid of its approach. For example, the college entrance examination. Some children are strong enough in their hearts. They work hard with all their might to fight for their own future. But there are always children who are not firm enough and are thus crushed. Bamboo might be such a child. She was afraid of the approaching college entrance examination, afraid of failure, and afraid of letting down her own efforts and others' expectations. So, when her parents suggested that she drop out of school, she cowardly chose to escape. In the future, if someone feels sorry for her, she'll also have a reason to shift the blame onto her parents or the unfairness of fate. Sean didn't seem to have thought of this aspect and immediately fell into deep thought. Although his mother wasn't around when he was a child, he was loved by his family, had no worries about food and clothing, was smart, and had no difficulty in studying. He smoothly got admitted to a prestigious university. For a question that was very simple in his eyes, he couldn't understand why some people just couldn't work it out. You can't make others empathize with you about a life they haven't experienced. Sean asked me, "Is there really no way at all then? If it's really like this, would you give up?" I asked him in return, and Sean shook his head without hesitation. Looking at the big mountain behind us where we came from and the endless highway leading to the prosperous city, The floating clouds passed by the gaps, just like the road of life with no end in sight. I suddenly made up my mind and said firmly, there's a way. I'll go with her. Going to an unknown place, having companions will drive away timidity. Sean looked at me somewhat surprisingly. Under our gaze, my tone was extremely serious. You're right. People should live according to what they like. The thing I want to try most now is to go to college. In my previous life, in order to take better care of Jason, I went wherever he went. I was busy running around for a living and paying off debts every day. It was hard to even take a breath. I had never thought about what I wanted. Once after a company gathering, Jason drank some wine, his steps were unsteady, and his face was flushed as he talked nonsense. Tina, I will definitely start my own company in the future and will never let you suffer again. What about you? What do you want your future to be like? His question left me stunned, and there was an indescribable sense of melancholy in my heart. Fortunately, he just asked casually and didn't pursue it further, so I just put this question aside. After coming to the small town, life slowed down, and I began to have plenty of time to think. But I was actually quite at a loss. In the past, I lived for Jason and revolved around his emotions. Now that I planned to live for myself, I found that I didn't have any hobbies and didn't even know what I wanted. But Sean told me, the future isn't something you think out. It's something you try out. Only by doing many things can you know whether they are what you want or not. So, I decided to take the college entrance examination again and experience a life I hadn't experienced before. It was just that the matter of how to enroll made things difficult for me. Sean waved his hand and took on this matter wholeheartedly. You don't need to worry about these. I'll take care of it. He found a repeat school for me in the urban area, which was very close to Bamboo's high school. We went to Bamboo's home again and used all kinds of means before we finally persuaded her parents to let Bamboo go back to school. On the day when she went back to school, Bamboo hugged me at the school gate and burst into tears. I'm so scared. I'm afraid that I won't be able to pass the exam and all the money and energy that Mr. Sean has spent on me will be wasted. I stroked her back to comfort her. Many people don't have a chance to start over. Both you and I are very lucky. So this time, don't give up. Please be sure to save yourself from difficulties thousands of times. During the intense review period, I received a call from Chloe. Her voice sounded a bit hesitant. Tina, Jason. Before she could finish her sentence, the phone was snatched away, and the person on the other end was trembling as he spoke. Tina, where are you? I miss you so much. Just wait for me a little longer. I'll be able to settle everything soon. Wait for me to come to you. I listened to him silently and finally interrupted him. I won't wait for you. There's no relationship between us anymore. Please don't bother my friends anymore. I didn't live in the school dormitory. Sean rented a house near the school for me and would come to visit me from time to time with some things. I persuaded Bamboo to live with me. Every day after the evening self-study, when we returned to the small house, we would take out the exercise questions we had done wrong that day and supervise and check each other. To be honest, going back to senior year in high school was really a bit challenging for me. The knowledge that I hadn't touched for many years and my state of mind that was no longer as simple as before made it difficult for me to fully immerse myself in it all at once. But since I had decided to do it, I had to go all out. When Jason showed up, I was a bit stunned. He had lost a lot of weight and looked travel-worn. The moment he saw me, he immediately hugged me in his arms. The familiar smell lingered around my nose, and Jason's body was trembling. Tina, I've been looking for you so hard. I thought I would never see you again in this lifetime. I subconsciously pushed him away and looked at him with a frown. You're already married. Always pestering me like this will have a bad influence. His eyes were red, and he poured out everything like beans falling from a broken bag. I got divorced. The Joanna family set a trap to make the Jason family go bankrupt in order to buy the land of the Jason family at a low price back then. My parents sold off our property to pay off the debts and the Joanna family instigated the creditors to put pressure on my parents together to force down the price, which led to their death in a car accident. I got close to Joanna just to bring down the Joanna family. I've never loved her. The person I've always loved is you. He looked at me pleadingly. Tina, please believe me, okay? I believe you. I nodded, thinking of the deceased Mr. Jason and Mrs. Jason, and felt an indescribable sadness in my heart. Jason was overjoyed and wanted to hold my hand, but I stepped back to avoid it. Whether you've had enough of a hard life or you want to avenge your parents, your choice is not wrong, but there's really no going back between us. I died once when you chose to propose to her. I really died once. Jason panicked when he saw my indifferent expression. Tina, please forgive me, okay? Give me another chance. I'll never make the same mistake again. You will. I mercilessly exposed him. I've never been your first choice. You were convinced in your heart that I would make concessions for you, so you had the audacity to abandon me without worry. I've founded a new company. We have money now. I won't let you suffer anymore in the future. I will definitely put you first from now on. I can change whatever you want me to change. Jason was about to continue arguing, but I didn't want to listen anymore. During those days in the past, I never felt bitter. I'm living a good life now too. You don't need to change for me, and I don't want to be anyone's second choice anymore. People often don't know what they want, but they are very clear about what they don't want. In this failed relationship, I clearly know that I don't want to be a parasitic daughter flower relying on others anymore. Emotional dependence is also a kind of parasitism. In my previous life, when Jason didn't want me anymore, I felt as if I couldn't live on. There are many wonderful things in life besides love. One really shouldn't be blinded by just one aspect. Jason said bitterly, "It's my fault. I'm sorry for you. Can't we really go back to the past?" I shook my head. Jason, I've already let it go. You should let it go too. For the person who I had depended on for 20 years, I couldn't bring myself to hate him. Even though he had betrayed me back then, what I felt more was sadness. Even if we won't have any intersections in the future, I still sincerely wish him well. Tina, you said you would never leave me and would accompany me for a lifetime. I couldn't help laughing wryly and looked at him with a hint of bitterness. Believe it or not, I really did accompany you for a lifetime once. It's just that the ending of that lifetime was too tragic. When Jason left in a daze, I just noticed Sean standing not far away. I didn't know how long he had been standing there. The wildflowers he was holding in his hand had wilted. Sean said a bit unnaturally, "Peek asked me to bring these to you." I took the flowers and replied with a smile. It felt really good to completely say goodbye to the past. It also felt wonderful to have a new lease on life. Time passed quickly, and the college entrance examination arrived as scheduled. On the day when the results came out, Sean was even more nervous than both of us. Both Bamboo and I performed steadily and just managed to pass the first-tier university admission line by the skin of our teeth. Sean was so excited that he was almost in tears. I joked with him, "You're a grown man. Why are you so teary-eyed?" "I just can't help it." At this moment, he truly understood his mother's choice back then. That sense of mission to help others change their fates made him resolutely follow the path that teacher Helen had taken before. Bamboo applied to a university in another city. He took out a loan for tuition fees and Sean subsidized his living expenses. After that, besides teaching, he also had to take on private jobs to earn money. I chose a normal university in the provincial capital. Before I went to register at the university, Sean came to me and handed me a thick envelope. "Go to school and enjoy your college life. Don't always think about working. There will be plenty of time for that in the future. If you're short of money, just tell me. I'll support you." I teased him, "Aren't you afraid that once I take your money and leave, I'll never come back? As long as you're living well, it doesn't matter whether you come back or not." Although he said that, his hand that suddenly tightened around the envelope betrayed his thoughts. Since he didn't say it, I didn't expose him either. He didn't want to interfere with my choices by speaking up, but he also hoped that I would come back. During the time in the small town, the fates of many people had unknowingly changed. Sean hadn't originally planned to stay here for a long time, and I had only intended to stay briefly too. In the end, both of us changed our minds. After graduating from university, I came back to the small town again. This time, I didn't plan to leave anymore. Not only me, but also Bamboo and those children who had once left the small town school all came back here in various ways. They built roads and houses, set up factories and bridges, made use of local resources to develop tourism. They also established connections with enterprises to promote local industries and solve the employment problems of local residents. More and more people who had gone out to work came back to the small town. Everyone was doing their part to help their hometown. There were more children in the small town again, and many young teachers were newly recruited by the school. And Sean and I have been staying here. On the day I came back, Sean stammered and asked me, "Why did you choose to come back?" I jumped into his arms, looked at his red ears, and said with a light smile, "Because this is the life I want. You hope that all children can go to school, and I hope that all mothers can come home." The end.